4. Wessex MK3 Helicopter. In Tiddenham Quarry, located in Chepstow, England, a massive Wessex MK3 helicopter sits at the bottom of the seafloor. Divers are taken down by a shuttle and then can explore the area, which just so happens to be full of underwater vessels. The development of the MK3 started in 1995, with its forerunner the MK2. This was a model with 2 seats powered by a diesel engine. These engine types aren't typically seen in aircraft due to their relatively high mass-to-power ratio. Only one prototype was built of the MK2. Years later, the MK3 was introduced at the 2006 ILA in Berlin, powered by the same diesel engine. This 3-seater model is clearly copied from the MK2. The frame is built from aluminium tubes and the cabin can be equipped with a glass cockpit. It's a modern-looking design, giving the pilot and passengers an excellent view of their surroundings with its large nose window section. The sunken MK3 helicopter is located in the water at the National Diving and Activity Centre in Chepstow, England, and it's truly a horrifying sight to see. It's decrepit and rusted, but you can still clearly see the coat of yellow paint that covers the exterior of the cockpit. The aircraft is now mostly covered in green, slimy algae, and it's obvious that the years spent under the surface have not been kind to it. This particular MK3 helicopter was deliberately sunk in December of 2007 and was sourced from the Royal Navy themselves. A 100-ton crane carefully lowered the craft into the water, and police specialist underwater and search teams assisted in getting it safely to the seafloor. Unfortunately, after 19 years in operation, the National Diving and Activity Centre is now closed to the public, after a tragic incident in 2014 where a woman died while exploring the site, which only makes this place even more horrifying. 3. San Pedro de Alcantara. Historic shipwrecks litter the seafloor within Florida Keys National Maritime Sanctuary. The vessels are dispersed along coral reefs, partially hidden in muddy sands just a few miles from shore. A total of 9 ships have made their home here, all with their own unique stories to tell. The oldest of these ships that are found here is the San Pedro de Alcantara. It was built in 1770 with its main purpose to transport valuables. In 1784, the San Pedro traveled to Peru with 4 tons of gold, 153 tons of silver, and 600 tons of copper loaded on board from Peruvian mines. A collection of ancient ceramics that originated from the Chimu culture were also transported by the vessel, as well as political prisoners from the Tupac Amaru rebellion. The silver that was carried by the San Pedro were in the form of minted coins, and most of them were pieces of 8, which was a coin that represented the Spanish dollar. Unfortunately for the ship and its crew, the weight of the loot was too much for the vessel to bear, weighing twice as much as it should have. Before heading back to Spain, the captain warned that the boat would risk losing its bottom in a storm, but the advice was ignored and they set sail. During this journey, the San Pedro constantly leaked, which made it difficult for the crew to man the pumps. She had no choice but to port in Talcahuano, Chile, in order to be repaired before continuing their expedition. However, when the San Pedro rounded Cape Horn, she had to be fixed yet again in Rio de Janeiro. After making multiple stops, the ship continued its journey to Spain in early 1786. Unfortunately, the boat sank to a depth of 18 feet along the Portuguese coast after being caught in a hurricane on February 2, 1786. A full crew of 398 people had been on board when the tragedy occurred. 128 of them lost their lives that day. Spanish salvage operations began immediately, which was carried out by roughly 40 underwater divers. Even without the help of the gear and technology we have now, they still ended up bringing about 750 tons of cargo back to the surface over a period of 3 years. After most of its treasure had been recovered, the ship was almost forgotten about. It laid in that same spot for nearly 200 years. It wasn't until the 1960s that the wreck was rediscovered in Hawke Channel, which stretches from Biscayne National Park to Key West, which is only 1 mile south of Indian Key. The wreck has since become one of the most popular diving sites in the area, associated with the Silver Plate Fleet. Throughout the years, wreck divers have still been able to discover a plethora of silver coins dating back to the early 1700s, making this a rather productive site. Along with the various bits of treasure that have been recovered, the San Pedro has much more to offer to anyone that wants to explore the underwater sea. Tropical fish surround the sunken vessel and gather towards her keel and ribs, which have since been buried under the white sand at a depth of 18 feet. The battered remains of the San Pedro are enveloped by brilliant coral, seagrass, and various pieces of timber. Ballast stones from the ship make up a relatively large pile on the seafloor, about 30 feet wide and 90 feet long. There are red ladrillo bricks that can also be seen mixed in with the ballast, which once made up the base of the boat's galley stove. One of the most interesting things you can find in this shipwreck is the 1733 anchor, and it sits towards the north end of the ballast pile. A total of 7 cannons can also be seen strewn about the site, but 3 of them are hard to spot since they're mostly covered in sand. To make sure that divers know exactly where they are, a plaque is situated at the south end of the wreck. The plaque states that the site is identified as a state underwater archaeological preserve. The ship has definitely deteriorated over the years, and the rampant salvaging hasn't helped, but it's still a great place to visit if you're looking for an eerie new dive site to explore. Would you rather find a perfectly preserved diamond necklace or a bag of gold coins while exploring an underwater shipwreck? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe. 2. USS Kitawaki. On July 10, 1945, the USS Kitawaki was launched by the Savannah Machine and Foundry Company in Savannah, Georgia. It had been sponsored by Mrs. Howard S. Rue Jr. and was commissioned on July 18, 1946. After it was thoroughly tested to determine if it was seaworthy, the ship departed from Charleston, South Carolina, and made its first ever journey to Balboa Canal Zone on October 3rd. In the beginning of its service history with the US military, it was initially assigned to rescue duty and support with Submarine Squadron 6, Subron 6. The vessel was a submarine rescue ship, and it accompanied other submarines during maneuvers to monitor various diving operations, recover practice torpedoes, and practice underwater rescue operations. In late May of 1949, Kitawaki left Balboa and headed to Norfolk, Virginia to continue to assist duty with Subron 6. Starting on January 17th of the next year, the 251-foot ship provided equipment and divers during salvage operations in order to free the Missouri, which was a battleship that had been grounded in tidal banks off the coast of Thimble Shoals. Then, in the 1950s, the vessel sailed to the Caribbean while it supported the Submarine Force U.S. Atlantic Fleet ships. In 1959, the Kitawaki set a world record for completing the deepest submarine rescue exercise at a depth of 705 feet. Kitawaki was then stationed near Cape Canaveral, Florida, where she helped the USS George Washington launch the first 2 Polaris ballistic missiles that were ever fired from a submerged submarine. The ship operated out of Norfolk all the way until August 1961, which is when she set sail for Rota, Spain in the Mediterranean. While deployed with the US 6th Fleet, it cruised from Spain to Greece and supported submarine maneuvers from Piraeus. In early February of 1963, the ship was on duty off Key West when it noticed the Jose Maria Perez, a Cuban boat, and rescued 12 refugees, 3 of which were children. The men and women were trying to escape communist oppression in their home country, and Kitawaki helped them make it safely back to US soil. Let's fast forward a bit to 1986. On January 28th, the Space Shuttle Challenger was set to launch into orbit. However, disaster struck and the craft broke apart just 73 seconds into the flight. Debris rained from the sky into the ocean, and interestingly, Kitawaki was responsible for recovering the Challenger's black box. In December 1989, the ship provided surface support throughout a Navy Trident missile test that took place in the Atlantic Ocean. But when Greenpeace learned of the testing, it sent ships to protest the exercises. Greenpeace began attacking the USS Kitawaki by ramming the bow of their ship into the Kitawaki's aft port side, but the ship fought back. The water vessel then hit the Greenpeace ship hard as a return of aggression, which disabled their engines, leaving their boat dead in the water. Then, just 5 years later, USS Kitawaki was ordered to be decommissioned, and it was also removed from the Naval Vessel Register on the same day of September 30th, 1994. The title of the ship was then sold to the Cayman Islands government for an undisclosed amount of money. The territory wanted to acquire the ship so they could turn it into an artificial reef, but the Kitawaki's title wasn't transferred until November of 2008. Finally, in 2011, the vessel was sunk just off the coast of 7 Mile Beach, Grand Cayman on January 5th in Marine Park. The ship had a long history, and oddly enough, it now rests on the sand in shallow waters. The depth of the ship, around 60 feet, makes it an extremely popular diving site for scuba divers, freedivers, and snorkelers. The waters surrounding the ship are crystal clear, making it easily visible from the surface, and the incredibly preserved appearance of the vessel makes it a truly eerie sight to behold. The highlights of the submarine include the tall smokestack and the giant propellers, the mess hall, 2 recompression chambers, and the head is complete with an unbroken mirror. In early 2017, Kitawaki's famous wheelhouse had the panels removed after it was damaged in a storm, but you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at the wreck. Divers are even able to pose at the captain's wheel for pictures. Sadly, when Tropical Storm Nate hit the area, the ship's anchor chains were snapped, which caused Kitawaki to be pushed onto its port side. And even though the sunken vessel may look terrifying to some people, it's doing wonders for the local marine life. All over the shipwreck, you can find arrowhead crabs, peppermint shrimp, and fireworms. Garden eels have made their homes in the sand surrounding Kitawaki, which attracts eagle rays and southern stingrays to the ship as well. If you are planning to go on a diving expedition anytime soon, this is an opportunity that may be too good to refuse. 1. M42 Duster. At Tank Reef in Aqaba, Jordan, there is an entire underwater area covered with sunken tanks. This project began back in 1985 when King Abdullah II decided that a Lebanese freighter called the Cedar Pride needed to be repurposed as an artificial reef. In 1998, another wreck was added to the site, but this time it was done by the Jordanian Royal Ecological Diving Society, JEDS. The American-built M42 Duster tank served as the first ever tank of the reef. This vehicle was a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. Construction for the M42 tank began in 1952 and was completed in December of 1960 for the United States Army. The tank division of General Motors Corporation was responsible for the production of this vessel. It was in service until 1998, with only 3,700 of them ever made. It could seat 6 people, and it weighed 49,500 pounds. These tanks assisted ground forces throughout the Vietnam War, but newer models had already been in production by the time the war ended, and they were no longer needed after that. The M42 is located only 66 feet from the shore, and it sits roughly 20 feet below the surface. It looks fairly fragile now as it sits on the sandy ocean bottom, with algae and other plant life growing out of the sides of the craft. Nevertheless, it's still an interesting and rather haunting dive site for anyone that enjoys military history. Which one of these haunting underwater vessels would you most like to visit on your next diving expedition? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!